About a month ago, when summer was just at its end, my friend Rose and I decided to go for a drive up to the mountains. I grew up nearly out of the city limits and drove the mountain roads often. Rose is a newer friend in my life and had only been up to the mountains a few times. I was eager to show her how cool it was at night, especially when you're headed back to town and you can see all the city lights as you're leaving the foothills. I love listening to creepy videos and watching scary movies, which may have been a big help for Rose and I on this particular night. We headed up in my van, a dependable 03 Toyota, who had made the journey with me dozens of times before. There's a part where the pavement ends and the gravel road takes you deeper into the mountain. Just beside this stretch of asphalt to gravel is a stretch of dirt that people use to park their trucks and trailers. Rose and I drove by, and I noted that the pullout was empty, as was normal for this time of night. It was 10 p.m, the sun had set, and the lights with timers had all turned on in town. I'd never seen any lights up on the mountain though. Almost every farming field on the mountains is fenced off with a locked gate that will say private property, normally with bullet holes in the metal, to show that the owners are armed and generally pissed off at idiots that try to break into their fields. Every field in the mountains is watered with a center pivot irrigation system. Those are the long repeatedly arched systems with metal frames and wheels that are commonly seen all over the United States agriculture districts. I'd seen a few irrigation systems in town that have lights with timers on them, so at first I wasn't too surprised when I saw one light in a field. We'd only gone a quarter of a mile by now, but then I remembered that not only had the light not been there before, it was in the wrong place. Fuck, I sighed, which was probably not what Rose wanted to hear in the middle of her first nighttime mountain excursion. "What's up?" Rose asked. "Well, I know farmers are harvesting now, so I guess a light in a field makes sense, but at the same time, I've never seen that one before," I say, gesturing off to our right, where there is a very random amber light off at the edge of the field. It's dark enough that I can see fences or any of the boulder around it, but I was familiar enough with the mountains to know that it was the edge of the property. I started to tap on the wheel anxiously, as I was filled with mixed emotions. I was eager to keep going because the mountains were going to be beautiful in the half moon, and Rose had never seen them at night before. At the same time, my brain told me that if I'm going to listen to a few dozen hours of horror stories per month, I'd at least better get some meaning out of them. Fuck, I'm sorry Rose, I'd keep going if those were tractor headlights, but I've never seen just one right up there, especially in that field. I've never even seen it farmed, so it wouldn't make sense to waste energy or money lighting it. Rose is amazing, and didn't mind that we were turning around only a quarter mile in. We turned and headed back towards the asphalt. I had no idea why, but I felt there was a clock that had suddenly started ticking. "Hey, Rose, could you hold the handle, please? I'm going to go fast enough that you might want to hold on to something. I promise we're safe." Rose silently clutched the oh shit handle above the passenger side of the car, and I went faster. I felt the sense that it was time to hurry up, so I did. I zoomed back towards the asphalt as fast as I dared, my sense of trepidation only intensifying when we reached the truck parking zone. There was a white truck and flatbed trailer that had not been there less than 10 minutes before. 5, maybe 6 guys were around the truck that had its headlights on. One guy was in a UTV, backing it off a flatbed trailer so fast that I thought he was going to crash into one of his friends. I raced by and somebody ran behind the car. I turned onto a road that would lead to a main road. "Rose?" I asked while inching my way up to 70 miles per hour. "Were those people there when we drove by earlier?" I just wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy. "Nope," Rose said evenly. I sighed, copying her tone, even as I jumped up to 75 and glanced at my rearview mirror. As far as I could tell, they weren't following us, but we had 8 miles of straight, flat roads with no cover before we eventually managed to reach civilization. Did they seem like they were in a hurry to you? There was no other traffic, so we didn't have to slow down for anyone, which helped us both remain as calm as possible. Just a bit, she laughed nervously, looking over her shoulder to check for any cars as well. Thankfully, nobody came. We drove to a crowded restaurant and sat in the car while we calmed down. We tried to think of a reason why those guys had shown up so abruptly in the middle of the night. Rose suggested that maybe their friends were camping and in trouble. All of the land in the mountains are private property, so nobody camps there. I'm glad Rose and I left, so we didn't have to find out why 6 guys decided they needed to rush up to the mountain in the middle of the night. When I was 17, I lived with my grandparents in a tucked-away suburban neighbourhood in SoCal. I was very social back then, partied a lot, and was out doing something basically every single night, getting home anywhere from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. We had only lived there for maybe 6 months and only had one key. The neighbourhood was all old white people and some younger families, all upper middle class, and no one drove into our street unless they lived there or knew someone who did. My family was always home, so I never took the sole house key, and the front door and backyard sliding door were always unlocked, so I could come home at any time of the night and then lock it behind me. Also, my husky slept outside and liked to come in and out as she pleased, which is the main reason the slider was always open all night. I'll circle back to why mentioning my dog is important in a bit. Fast forward to a random night when I was out with a friend of mine. No recollection of what we did that night. Probably went to someone's house and did a bunch of coke until 3 a.m, but anyway. She drives me home, I don't drive, and drops me off at about 3:45 a.m. I say my goodbyes, head inside and lock the door behind me. I go into the kitchen and pop a cup of noodles in the microwave. About 5 minutes later, I go upstairs to my room. My room was on the 2nd floor, directly above the garage and driveway. Looking out, you see about 50 yards the entrance to my street, which was shaped like the letter P, so anyone who drove into my street I could clearly see, and they would have to loop around and pass our house to leave via the same road. This is when I looked out of my window and saw them. My lights were already on, and my curtains already drawn from when I left in a hurry earlier. I walked up to the window to shut the curtains, looked down into the driveway, where between my grandparents' 4 parked cars stood a very large man staring up into my window, dead still, blank stare. He was Hispanic, late 20s to early 30s, about 6'2" and at least 250 pounds. I immediately dropped to the floor, but there's no way he didn't already see me. As I dropped, I saw another man walking out from my gate, which is not visible from my window, next to the driveway, coming out from the inside, towards the other man. I heard some brief speaking from the man who came out of the gate and couldn't understand what language it was, but it was not English. Oddly, it didn't sound Spanish either. After I dropped to the floor, I crawled to my grandpa's office, which sat directly next to my room and had a window that also faced the driveway. The lights were off in there, so I could look out without being seen. The man who I saw, standing between our cars, was still standing there, staring and motionless. The other man was looking around and pointing to my house. I nearly vomited. I crawled to my grandparents' room down the hall. I was crawling because the upper level was loft style, where you can see the whole lower level and out of the glass front door and windows. I frantically knocked on their door, trying to stay quiet, as to not tip off these men, because I wanted them to be caught and questioned by the police. My grandparents finally woke up and could barely understand me because I was shaking so badly and my words were just spilling out. My grandpa, being the fearless, grumpy old man he is, put on his robe and decided to walk outside and investigate himself. I called the cops and watched from the upstairs window to make sure nothing happened to him. By the time he went outside and stood in the driveway, The men were gone from my sight. A few moments later, a car sped out of our street, lights off, and no license plate. He told me, once he came back inside, that when he went out there, they were parked next to my next-door neighbour's car, in her driveway, with the car on but the lights off, and the seats reclined. He said it looked like they were sleeping, or pretending to. When they looked over and saw him, they backed out and sped off. The cops took a whopping 30 minutes to show up. Didn't want my descriptions of the men or the car. They said lock the doors, and if they come back, call the cops. They drove around my street for a bit, then left. Great, thanks for the help. My grandma thought I was just on drugs and didn't feel the level of urgency or danger that I felt. My grandpa was also very nonchalant, even though he saw them, which pissed me off and made me feel even more helpless. I slept on the floor of their room from that night on until about 3 months later. That was not the end though. So, my husky. Her name is Nala, and at the time she was about 2. She's small for a husky, about 50 pounds, but to people who aren't super familiar with dogs, she looks pretty threatening. She chose to always sleep outside, which is why we always left the slider to the backyard open. Literally, always. My grandparents would get pissed when I would close and lock it, because she'd do her business in the house. Anyway, about a month or so before that night, I saw those men. I was in the backyard and saw Nala chewing on something. She has possession aggression with certain things like bones, small animals, and things she's stolen. That basically means when you go near her and she's in that state, she growls, flashes her teeth, snarls, and lunges. And if you dare to reach your hand out as if to take what she has, you'll lose that hand. When I walked up to her, she lunged at me. She had a steak, a rotten, mouldy, obviously old T-bone steak. Looked like she'd been working on it for a while. I asked my grandparents, they didn't give it to her. Asked my neighbours if maybe they threw her one over the fence. They had no idea what I was talking about. I didn't think anything of it until it happened 4 more times. 4 separate occasions I found her with a rotten meat clinging to the bone T-bone steak. I threw them away each time I found them, so I knew they were new. I asked my neighbours again, thinking maybe they thought I was mad, that they were giving my dog food and lying to me, but nothing. Like I said, this was coincidentally happening in the weeks leading up to the night I saw those men. The event that made me start to connect the dots between the steaks Nala was finding and these men happened the second time I encountered them. Fast forward to about 3 months later after that initial event. I hadn't slept in my room since, and I went on a trip to Europe to visit some family for a month. Nothing had happened since that night, but the trauma and fear was very real. It made me lose weight. I stayed up all night listening to every noise I heard and analysing it, peeking out of the windows every couple minutes until 6 a.m. I was a wreck. While out of the country, I came to terms with everything in my own mind and decided I had to stop living like how I was, in constant fear. What were those men going to do to me if I hadn't seen them? If they wanted to break in and rob us, most all of us were gone during the day, most days a week for at least a few hours. Why wait for everyone to be home? If they were peeping Toms, they could have parked on my street and watched me all night, and I would have never known. I think they were going to try to take me. Trafficking, maybe? I should mention, I am not a model, not a known one, and have a decently big social media following. I do a lot of live streams. I'm very interactive with my followers, and had been in the spotlight online since I was 13. I got back from Europe, and about a week or so later decided I was going to finally go out again. It was the first day where I really felt okay, and not so afraid. I got used to things being normal again, and was excited to move on from the whole thing. That night I went out. I got home earlier, about 1 to 2 a.m, and had my key this time. We started locking the doors after that night. My friend waited for me to go through my gate and get to my door before leaving. As I pulled out my keys and walking up to the door, I heard a rustling in the bushes. I thought, I'm being paranoid. It's just an animal. To help form a better picture, you walk through a 3-foot-tall swing-open gate adjacent to the driveway and about 6 steps down a path to the front door, and a small 3-foot gate to the backyard is adjacent to the front door to the left. When I heard the rustling, I instinctively flashed my unlocked phone screen in that direction for light to look into the pitch-black backyard. At the exact moment I did that, someone about 4 foot in front of me in my backyard flashed their phone screen as if they were investigating the same way I was. I didn't see the person, just a phone screen, which had a text convo open on it. I noted that it wasn't an iPhone. I let out a gasp, and they whipped around the corner back into the backyard, and I bolted inside the front door. I ran to the back slider and slammed and locked it and ran upstairs while calling the police. That entire interaction outside happened in about 10 seconds. The police showed up and did nothing at all, just like before. After talking with them for a while, I went upstairs to my room and peered out the window as they spoke to my grandparents. As I was scanning the street from the window, I heard a whistle coming from directly below me, the driveway. It was that whistle people do when trying to get someone's attention, or when calling your dog to you, as if communicating with his buddy saying, "Cops are here, let's dip." My theory about the Stakes is that these men were stalking me and casing our house for at least a month before I saw them that first night. They must have seen my dog, and not knowing that she doesn't bark or attack strangers, baited her with stakes to gain her trust, so they could go into the backyard without a problem. We moved a couple months later, due to something unrelated, and never saw them again. To this day, I struggle with the PTSD those events caused me. I have lived in constant fear and paranoia ever since. I can't be alone at night at all. I think the reason it affects me so much is because they were never caught. No one knows what their end goal was. And, the worst part for me, how the fuck did they find me? Did they follow me home from seeing me somewhere in public one night? Were they some of the gardeners who often mowed the lawn around me as I laid out and tanned? Were they some of the workers that redid our roof for weeks on end a month or so before any of this happened? Everyone on our street had their roofs redone one by one for about a month. And since I was on the top floor, I often woke up to the workers sitting in my window, still adjacent to my bed, with my curtains open, literally inches away from me. Did one of the workers tell a friend there was a hot teenage girl who always left her curtains open? Did they find me through social media? I'll never know, and it kills me. I still hear that whistle every now and then. Honestly, it might be auditory hallucinations at this point. I don't know. I'll never know who those men were, or what their intentions were, but regardless, let's not meet again. This is my first post on this sub, but I've frequented it for a while. This is really the only experience I've had that would fit on this sub, and it felt so surreal while it was happening. So, I'm a 21-year-old male, and this experience happened last summer, while I was on vacation at Myrtle Beach with my family. We were staying in a resort right on the beach, and were on the 13th and 14th floor in some sort of timeshare. One night, I was feeling restless and having a hard time falling asleep, and at around 3 a.m, I decided to go out on the balcony to get some air. I stepped out and was stunned as there was a full moon and the moonlight on the water was really beautiful. The beach was completely empty as far as I could see, and I had never seen it like that before. I decided since I wasn't able to sleep, I might as well head down, take a stroll, and listen to some music to relax. Hopefully, when I returned, I'd be able to get some sleep. It was really unsafe and dumb of me, but since it was 3 AM and the rest of my family was asleep, I decided to just head down without letting anyone know I was going, as I thought I'd just go and chill there for 10 to 15 minutes, then come right back up. So, at the base of the timeshare we were at, there was an area with a pool, an outdoor bar, and then 2 boardwalks separated by about 100 feet, which both led to the beach. On the sides of the boardwalks, there were swaths of tall grass separating the ocean and the resort. When I got down to the base, the entire area was completely deserted, and I started walking down the boardwalk on the right towards the beach. As I'm walking down, I suddenly see someone approaching me from the beach, which was strange because I had a pretty clear view of the same area from the balcony just before and had literally seen no one. I start to get a bit nervous as I see this figure approach, and as I get closer, I see it as a man, maybe in his late 30s, who has a backpack on and is wearing glasses with large square lenses. As he gets closer, I get a clearer look at him as the boardwalk is sort of illuminated by lights from the outdoor bar. He looks very on edge and alert, almost like he is trying to find someone who is trying to meet him in this area, and his clothes are somewhat tattered. We made eye contact, and I sort of nod at him and pass. At this point, I'm creeped out, because, honest to God, he had a sort of Jeffrey Dahmer look. Maybe it was the glasses, and he just didn't seem like he actually belonged to the timeshare. I shake it off and keep walking down to the beach and put my headphones in. As I get down to the beach, I turn right and start walking parallel to the water, and I'm just taking in the scenery. I'm barefoot and decide it would be nice to walk just along the shoreline, so I move closer to the water and continue walking. I'm walking for no longer than a minute before I get a really strange feeling that something is wrong. I take off my headphones and turn around, and I see a dark figure that is trailing me just up the shore. He is situated in between me and the timeshare. I immediately can tell from the figure's height, body type, and demeanour that it is the same man I passed on the boardwalk. At this point, I'm starting to panic, as every story from LetsNotMeet is rushing to my head. At the same time, I'm trying to rationalise, as it feels too surreal that I may actually be in a dangerous situation. So I remind myself it could just be a coincidence, and the man decided he also wanted to take a walk on the beach, and just happened to be headed in the same direction as me. So, I take some breaths and turn my head back to the ocean and continue walking in the same direction. After a couple of seconds, I turn my head back again and see that now he is much closer to me and is not walking parallel to me, but is definitely actually walking towards me. I pick up my walking speed now and turn my head back around and see he is matching my faster pace and is still walking towards me and the water. Still, for some reason I think, okay, maybe he also wants to walk by the water. There's no way I'm actually being followed by a creepy man on a deserted beach. So at this point, to truly test it, I do a 180 and completely change directions. And as I turn my head, I see him completely change directions with me and continue closing in distance. And he is power walking now. It suddenly hits me that I'm in a really bad situation, and I take off on a run along the water, and he starts running as well, but stays upshore of me so that if I try to run up towards the boardwalk, he will intercept me. I'm freaking out now and just keep running with no plan, but figure that since I'm 20 and sort of fit, I should probably be able to keep running along the water and outrun him, and then find some other exit off the beach and either call my family or head back to the timeshare on the road. So I keep running, but he's keeping up with me, and this goes on for what feels like 10 to 15 minutes. The scariest part of all this, which I wouldn't have thought of, is it is completely dead silent. All I hear is my breath and feet on the sand, and when I turn, I only see his shadowy figure upshore keeping pace with me. Suddenly, up ahead in the sand, I see a small blue light and what looks like 4 people on the beach with a blanket. They are a bit upshore. I turn and look at the figure and bet even though they are upshore, I can beat him to these people. So I start sprinting towards them with hopes of quickly telling them what's going on so we can all confront him. I really use up my energy sprinting towards them, and as I approach, my heart drops. What I see is 4 guys on a blanket with 3 or 4 handles of hard liquor surrounding them. 3 of the handles are empty, and the 4th is about half empty. 3 of the guys are just completely passed out on blankets, and the last is half sat up, obviously beyond shit-faced, with a sort of party hat on that has blue lights on it, and is talking to himself. His eyes are half closed, and he doesn't even register me approaching him, even though now I'm no more than 5 feet away. I turn and see the figure has slowed down and is observing me, and then I see he makes sense of the group's state and suddenly starts sprinting at me. As he gets closer, the half-passed out guy's blue light illuminates him, and I can clearly see it's the same guy as before. I make eye contact with him, and I can see he's wide-eyed and looks almost manic and is barreling at me full sprint. At this point, I decide I have to do something decisive. It seemed like I had underestimated his fitness, and since I had just sprinted towards this group and exhausted myself, I was afraid that he might actually be able to catch up with me if we just continued running along the beach indefinitely. And then, who knows what. So, instead of turning around and running, I suddenly sprint towards him and to the right, which I don't think he was expecting at all. I catch him off balance and run past him, and I literally am running full sprint back to the timeshare without even looking back. All the hairs on my neck were standing, and it felt like a dream where you're barely evading someone but he's right about to catch you. The adrenaline was crazy, and I keep running and start to see the timeshare. I finally turn around to see how close he is, and I see him in the distance, maybe 400, 500 feet away. He's lost a lot of distance on me. I don't waste any time and sprint up the boardwalk and towards the base of the timeshare. I jam the elevator buttons and leap in and start mashing the closed door button as I'm gasping for air. The door closes and I hit the button for my floor. And when the elevator reaches, I literally sprint back to my room, open the door, enter, and then slam the door and double lock it. I'm breathing heavy and I drop to the floor and just sit there for a minute, not believing what just happened. I crouch and crawl over to my room, as I was literally afraid he might be able to see me through the window on our balcony, and I enter my room. Let's just say, I definitely wasn't able to sleep after that. Guy who chased me on the beach? Let's not meet again.